Dissenting voices are being shut down. Centralized power are arresting world leaders. The elites have abandoned us. What are we going to do now? Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Turn on the notification bell if you haven't turned it on right now, because they will not send you this kind of content, not without a fight. They won't. Subscribe to our channel right now. We make this content every single day without fail, and I don't want you to miss a second of this stuff. Have you noticed that the authorities are doubling down on centralized control? Have you noticed that dissenting voices are being smeared even in congressional hearings? Have you noticed that the elites seem to be militarizing and preparing for the next phase of social evolution? I had a conversation with the world-class Pulitzer Prize winning conspiracy theorist Glenn Greenwald, who's also on Rumble like me, and I asked him, why is it that the elites are no longer even pandering to ordinary people? Do they think they have this battle won? Do they think that the emergent forces of AI and the militarization of the police force means that they no longer even have to pretend to listen to us? This is a fantastic conversation. Stay to the very end. Let me know in the comments what you think, who you want to see on our show as guests, and what questions you think I missed. We have been discussing the nature of centralized authority, its growing ubiquity. It's clearly becoming more radical in the enforcement of its edicts and ideals, yet its legitimacy seems shakier than ever. The threatened and presumed arrest of Trump is one way that we can discern this waning of actual legitimate authority, and as it continues to double down. Obviously, the neglect of the comparable Russiagate Steele dossier stuff is an aspect of this we've covered, but as it's happening at the same time as a warrant has been issued for the arrest of Putin, it's difficult not to look at comparable war crimes. We used this piece today about, I think it's from cato.org, talking about how, sort of Biden, Trump, Obama have all been explicitly involved in the UAE bombing of Yemen. And I suppose what I would like your perspective on, Glenn, is the decline of trust in authority and almost the assumption now that there is no central body that has the right to execute that kind of power. And if that is something that's real and legitimate, and if you feel that it's true as well, what does that tell us about where we are and where we have to get to?
Yeah, it's a very interesting paradox, isn't it? That secure, confident institutions of authority can give the people over whom they rule a greater degree of freedom, because they know that those people, by and large, trust those institutions and they're not endangered and threatened as a result. When those institutions fall into pervasive disrepute, when they're held in contempt, as is the case quite validly for most Western political and media institutions, that's precisely when they become even more authoritarian, when they start cracking down further on dissent because they're afraid. And instead of trying to determine what is the root cause of this loss of faith and trust and confidence, when's the last time you heard anyone who works in corporate media? They're very good at lamenting the fact that the public no longer trusts them. They're very good at blaming other people for the fact that the public no longer trusts them. When's the last time you heard any of them in any earnest way engage in self-reflection? What is it that we did to lose the trust and faith of the public? Or when has any government official done that? They watched Donald Trump get elected, clearly an expression, as I heard you saying earlier, of this kind of despair. Brexit was certainly the same thing, this kind of, we don't care what the consequences are. We believe the status quo is so corrupt and contemptuous of us that whatever you tell us we shouldn't do, we're going to do the opposite. There was definitely a lot of that in terms of how Bolsonaro got elected in Brazil across the democratic world. And so instead of ever asking, why are people losing faith and trust in us, they instead want to demonize the population. They're racist, they're dangerous, they're engaged in terrorism. And as a result, we need to crack down more on them. We need to censor the internet more. We need to criminalize dissent more. We need to try and prevent them from choosing their leaders by convicting them and rendering them ineligible. And as a result, it's an inescapable cycle that the more they do that, the less trust and faith there is in those institutions of power. And in turn, the more authoritarian they feel they need to be. And I think that's the cycle that we're currently in, and it can actually be very cleansing. I think it's good that people finally are seeing that Western institutions of authority merit their contempt and not respect, but it can also create a lot of instability and dangerous outcomes as well, because demagogues and others can cleverly exploit that for nefarious ends. But ultimately, they have no one but themselves to blame. And I think you're right. Their solution, instead of trying to fix it, is to just use force to crack down on those who want to challenge them.
While there has been no public mea culpa from any of those organizations, as you listed, whether they are media or political, and certainly, obviously, not corporate, I find it impossible to consider that they haven't privately taken place, that they haven't got within their circles, amongst their elders, amongst their highest intellects, people that are considering, oh no, the reason we've lost authority is because we've become corrupted, because the relationship between the corporate world and the state and the media has become too porous, and people are now realizing it because it's so easy for counter narratives to emerge, whether through credible and established journalists like yourself or new emergent voices or members of the public. They must understand that. They're making the decision to double down on authoritarianism and censorship and smearing opponents and dissenting voices. So, Glenn, why is it that that choice has been made, and what does that tell us about the likely trajectory over the coming years? I mean, in particular with regard to the likelihood of more pandemics, more legitimization of authoritarianism, because if you consider that they must have access to the kind of reflection and contemplation that has just been shared by you, they must know that, they must surely on some level, and they've elected not to explore it or express it, then there must be an alternative route. I know I'm making so many assumptions there, but that's what I do for a job. So what do you think about that, and what do you think it means about where we're going if they haven't got that reflection or they're not willing to express it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do fully agree with that assumption, namely that these elites, because they're so smart, and I'm sure a lot of them are quite smart, because they have this kind of sophisticated understanding of the world, it must mean that they realize they bear some of the culpability for what has happened. I think oftentimes to the contrary, especially when you have kind of an insular elite, an increasingly insular elite that is more and more removed from the rest of the society, kind of the Versailles dynamic where you just kind of hole yourself up in a royal court and think that the anger outside of the gates is just whiny, petulant, unjustified resentment and not grounded in legitimate grievances. A lot of elite classes throughout history have thought that about the populations over whom they were so abusively ruling. It's not so much an intellectual failing, it's a psychological failing. It's an inability to accept blame. And oftentimes, the smarter someone is, the more kind of awarded they are with position and privilege and prestige and award, the more convinced they become of their own infallibility. And the more they genuinely believe that anybody angry with them or dissatisfied with them must, by definition, be somebody whose thinking is misguided or who has poor character and who therefore needs to be controlled, who therefore needs to be constrained and limited in what it is they can do, is almost though it's proof. If you don't think Dr. Fauci is an eminent scientist with great integrity, by definition, you're someone who can't be trusted with free speech. You're someone who can't be trusted to vote for who you want, because the mere fact that you distrust these people, the highest and most renowned and well-regarded elites, is proof that you are broken, that you are somebody who needs leadership and guidance and control and have your liberty deprived of you. And I think the ability to engage in self-critique is something that is contrary to our instinct. It's something we have to work to get ourselves to do. And people who are just constantly having their goodness and their wisdom reinforced have no incentive to do that. I mean, Russell, to me, I know like each year that goes by, we all get older, like there's more and more people who haven't lived through it. But the 2003 invasion of Iraq, I think, was even more of an eye-opening moment than the 2008 financial crisis, although they came one after the other and they're probably interconnected and inextricable. But the fact that so many well-intentioned people assumed that when people like Colin Powell and Tony Blair and, the New York Times and all the journalists who you're told to trust from both sides of the aisle are all in unison telling you the same thing, and it all turns out to be a lie, and huge numbers of people are murdered because of it. They lose their lives because of it. The region is destabilized. ISIS arises. Like some of the worst possible outcomes imaginable because of the elites and the most well-regarded mistakes. And then you watch those very same people who to this day aren't just in the same positions of power, but greater positions of power. They suffered no consequences at all. Same with the 2008 financial crisis. Then, of course, you're going to create this breach where you have the elites over here and the masses over here who both distrust and hate them. And the more distrust and hate there is for the elites from the masses, the more the elites believe the masses can't be trusted to make their own choices. And I think that's the tension that's happening.
Well, then I agree. Glenn, if that is indeed the case, then what we have is in fact a new aristocracy, a new oligarchy. We have unattainable, unaccountable elites that are not interested in the voices of those they claim to represent. It sounds to me that you're describing, in a sense, the precondition for revolution, or a type of tyranny and authoritarianism such as the world has never before seen, because it's never had the utility that it currently has. So some of our most dystopic conjecture is legitimized by that trajectory. When you can observe individuals within that system advancing on the basis of deception, once that fissure that you described in 03 and 08 had become more entrenched, it's almost like it becomes literal farce. They can't double back and check now. Too late now. Just keep burying the bodies. Just keep putting the paving slabs over the cadavers. It just pave away the truth. Now, if this is the case, then it seems there's little value in dissecting and discerning between the minutiae that distinguishes the two parties. In fact, what's required is a galvanization of a kind of a new populist force. Is it, Glenn, or am I doing that speculative thing again?
No. I mean, I think that's the only project worth pursuing. I mean, that's what I regard my project as being when I wake up every day in terms of my work, is exactly that sort of unifying of people who are being told constantly that they're supposed to hate one another across ideological and cultural and religious and demographic divides, that instead unifying in that way, that even though you have a bunch of differences on these issues and these inflammatory issues, and you call yourself a leftist or a rightist or whatever, and you belong to this party or that party or some other party, the reality is you have so much more in common than you do differences. Namely, your lives are being controlled and exploited and abused by this very small segment of elite culture. And the only thing that matters is overthrowing their hegemony. And then once a fair system is imposed, you can start kind of grappling with those differences. Until then, you don't have any outlet for doing that. You don't even have the freedom to debate. You don't have the right even to speak. And I mean, that's literally true. And, I remember reading a lot when I was younger about the kind of oligarchs of, say, like the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, people like Rockefeller and Ford and all of those people. They would like go through the streets and they would, they were very PR minded. They would like throw dollars out of their cars to the public to try and curry favor with the public, to show that they actually cared, that they were people who wanted to help. They were very philanthropic for that same reason. They were very afraid of the masses. They knew that if the system became too extreme, their position would be threatened, because you would almost incite a revolution. And they were constantly thinking about how to placate the public just enough to keep the inequality still vast, but then the public just enough kind of appeased so they wouldn't do that. And I remember asking an extremely wealthy person I knew who worked in a hedge fund after the 2008 financial crisis, when the government under Obama so blatantly acted to benefit and shield the wealthiest people and kind of let the entire middle class and working class get expelled from their homes and evicted and suffer in generational debt. Where did that ethos go? Like, what happened to that? They no longer fear the masses. And what I concluded, and I was writing a book on this actually when the Brazil reporting started, was that basically the elite class has two options. You can appease the anger of the masses to give them just enough to keep them just enough satisfied that they don't want to get off their couch and risk things. Or you can say, you know what, we don't give a fuck about them. they probably will get to the point where they want to revolt. And so our strategy instead will be to militarize, to build a paramilitaristic society where we keep them under constant surveillance. We, make sure that the weapons we have are far greater than the weapons they have, so that if they do actually want to try and do something, they're going to be crushed by force. And that will either deter them and convince them ahead of time it's futile, or if they try it, they will in fact be crushed. And clearly the elite class has chosen that second option.
Yeah, that's not a heartening note to end on, Glenn. The elites armed themselves to the teeth. The glory days where it could be considered compassion to hurl dollar bills out of a limousine, out of rats and scumbags in the gutter are beyond us. I think that you're right, as a matter of fact. I suppose that aggregating and powerful new technologies are emerging that further tip the balance of power towards centralized authority. The more...
Let me just interject so that I don't go away as like the person who's just the bearer of bad news. Like, the reason I fight so much against internet censorship and internet surveillance is because I truly believe the technology that we're using right now, the audience that we're building, the sector of, online life and information dissemination that we are a part of is the thing that provides so much optimism. And they know it too, which is why they're so devoted to controlling it through censorship, to controlling it through exclusion from the financial system, to demeaning and discrediting us in every single way that they can, because that's the thing from which they feel most threatened. And I think they're right. I think the thing that we're being a part of, that we're a part of building with so many other people, is the thing that is genuinely encouraging.
Well, did you enjoy that conversation? If you want to see it in full, go over to Rumble right now. See the entire conversation. Glenn's on there as well. If you don't know that by now, you don't know much. And I know you know everything you need to know. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. My stand-up special is available for a one-off price of $20, or it's included in our membership scheme. There's a link in the description. Remember, turn on that notification bell right now. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.